I'm Kunle Barker, property expert, journalist and broadcaster.
From Ackroyd Lowry, I'm Oliver Lowry.
And I'm John Ackroyd.
And this is Urban Forecast, the show where we talk to the people defining the future of our cities. We discuss their background, what drives them, and the insights they've learned along the way.
This is a podcast for anyone who's interested in how we live, work or play in the cities of the future and what that means for the built environment today.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure.
As you say, property expert, journalist and broadcaster. And I wondered if you could just give the listeners a bit of an idea of that journey of how you ended up being this sort of modern Renaissance man straddling broadcast, design and property.
Weirdly, like all the journeys, I think, it was a journey. I started the journey before I even realised I had. So when I was at university in Leeds, I stayed on and I was doing a master's degree, and the bank manager just said, you can get this thing called a graduate mortgage. And I said, what's that mean? He said, what's a graduate mortgage? It means you can get X amount of money at 100%, so you don't need a deposit. I thought, wow, okay. So just buy a house. And she said, yeah. And I bought a student house in a place on Ryder Road, a place called Meanwood in Leeds, just a student area. I've never done that before, never done any property development before. I bought the house, spent the summer doing it up, lived upstairs and rented all the other rooms out. And it was great fun, I really enjoyed it. And I hadn't realised that was that was the beginning of the journey that led me to where I am now.
And were you studying anything to do with property, or was it just...
No, I did mechanical engineering, and for my masters I did human resource management with business. So absolutely nothing to do with property. I knew nothing about property, I don't come from a property background. But I lived, I think, and the important point was I lived in Leeds for, by that time, almost 5 years. That's when I was doing my master's degree. And I just knew that student housing was just rubbish. It was just, it's so different now, and we'll come to that later maybe, but then it was just awful. It was just drab furniture, everything about it was rubbish. And about a year before, maybe 2 years before that, they'd opened an IKEA in Leeds. So I just thought, no, I'm just going to paint. And I did all myself. I got someone in to do the kitchen. I did all the painting, and I relaid the floors, and we put a kind of vinyl floor, not a vinyl floor, a laminate floor, which was quite a new thing at the time. So put a laminate floor down, and just made it really nice. And mainly because I was going to be living there as well. And we made it really nice furniture and rented it out. And I realised that two things, it rented out really quickly, and it also meant that I got a bit of a premium on what the rate was for each rent. And again, I just fell into it and did it, and I just kept the house, and I moved out, and I kept the house for a bit. And then I realised that when I sold the house, I realised that it was what I was actually selling was a business then. Now, and a proven business, and so there was a premium then on the price that I got for it, and I took that, and then with some friends started buying more houses in Leeds and doing them up, and we bought some in Leicester, and we kept doing that, but we had a finite amount of money because it was just us, it was our money that we just invested. So every time we finished a project, we had to sell it in order to go on to the next project, and in that downtime we kept losing our guys, the teams that we built up. And I decided, why don't we try and keep them and get some work for them? And that coincided with the kind of a bit of a downturn in the market, I think, in mid-2000s, which was quite fortunate. And I remember I got a job plastering a ceiling in West London. By this time I was living in London in this flat that I bought near Maid Vale. And I just put an advert in the Yellow Pages. That's how long ago it was. It was in Yellow Pages. It wasn't even Google. So I put an advert in the Yellow Pages. I got a phone call. Someone said, I need a room plastering. I said, fine, I'll sort that out. Put the phone down, rang up somebody that I knew from a recruitment consultancy. Have you got any plasterers? Rang the plasterer up, arranged for the materials to be delivered, did the job, and it grew from there. We started doing bathrooms, we started doing kitchens and extensions. And then a friend of mine whose father had a construction company at the time, he since sold it. And they were quite a big old construction company. They did all the St Pancras and stuff. And I was with him, and he said to me, what are you doing at the moment? So we're doing some development, and we're doing some kitchens and bathrooms, but it was really hard work. It was me on my own. I was driving around visiting clients in the day, in the evening, coming home, organising jobs for the next day, but then also doing quotes for clients, negotiating with them. So it's really hard work. And he said to me, look, why don't you ever thought of getting on a framework? And I said, what's a framework? He said, if you get on a framework, work for a main contractor, get on a framework as part of the supply chain, working for a main contractor. And I said, what does that mean? He explained to me. I said, because if you do it, he said, you could do one deal and you'll be working for a year. I was like, really? He said, yeah, so great. And I then thought, how can I do that? And I packaged up all the photos that we had of all the jobs that we'd done, some of the properties that we'd sold in Leeds and Leicester, some ones in London, and probably with a little bit of marketing sort of fairy dust on them. And said, well, no, these were certain jobs. Presented them in a way which would suggest that we'd probably done more social housing work than we had. And I think I used Glenigan's, but even then it wasn't a database, it was a thing they used to post it out to you every week. So you just put it open, read down and just send it out, send these things out to people. And a company called Lake House rang me, who were working for Camden Council, and within a week I'd got my first decent homes refurb job. And from there it just blew up, and we were doing, I think at our height we were working for Lake House, we were working directly for Camden, we were working for Waits, working for Peabody, for Limbrooks, who now got taken over by Waits, City West Homes, and we were doing pretty much if you think about the raft of property that a local authority might hold, we did everything. So we did some high value assets in Hampstead, which were, one of them was a Jewish old people's home opposite the tube station in Hampstead, up by the Everton Cinema there. And we refurbed that. I was really fortunate. I worked on Alexander's Road as well, which was great for me because I've always loved that development, and worked all over London, pretty much all over the country doing decent homes work. And I think at our height we were doing opening 50 kitchens and bathrooms a week, which is quite a big operation to get. And then, like all people who are in these supply chains, we got hurt by something that happened upstream. So somebody goes bust upstream, and it filters down, and then all of a sudden we're not getting paid. So we segued out of that business, parcelled it up, and there was a kind of like management buyout with some of the guys at work. The guy who'd been my commercial manager, he took it on, and he now brilliantly, I saw him last week, he's doing really well, and he's just done TikTok's offices or something, and he's done works for Google, and deals in bespoke carpentry. And the other guy, Vlad, set up his own electric business because I trained them up to be our in-house electrician.
So it was a very construction route into property.
It was all construction, except that I learned a really difficult lesson, one of the sort of lessons you only need to learn once, about what it means.
I don't like those lessons.
You know what? They're important lessons.
Yeah.
If you can learn them by talking to somebody else, that's the best way.
Yeah.
But sometimes you do have to learn them yourself. And it was about understanding design. Now, up until that point, design had always been this weird kind of mix of me as the contractor pushing my agenda against what the client wanted versus what the architect wanted. And it's a weird dynamic actually, because in a smaller job, on a residential job, the contractor has all the power actually once you get onto site, because they're the one that's seeing the client all the time, and the contractor, right? So you can say if someone's done something slightly wrong, you can say, as long as it's not dangerous, you can say, well, you know what? It's actually, if we do that, then we can do this, and it'll be okay, and we explain it to them, and as long as they're happy, we move forward. But when you're dealing with, like, working for Camden, and they have their clerk of works comes in, they just go in, they go, no, that's wrong, and you're like, oh yeah, but no, it's wrong. Don't care. There's no, and then you should have read the drawings, and we had not lots, but we had a problem with tiling, and it was just we just missed out a square metre, and you have to then go back. But if you're doing 10 a week, if that problem is only discovered like 3 months, that is expensive to go back.
So you said it was a tough lesson. What was the learning? Read the drawings.
Read the drawings, understand the design, understand what is actually drawn, and what you're going to build.
Yeah.
Right? So we became in that, and for that one incident, immediately turned us to a design-led agency.
Because if you had the design capabilities in house, there wouldn't be the issue of not understanding the design intent. Is that that's
correct? And also to understand the design and understand, to ask questions about it if there's something in a drawing that you don't understand, and then that inevitably just gives you a lot more experience and leads you to understanding design intent and what that means. And there is obviously sometimes a gap between design intent and what is actually feasible, especially on these decent homes which are refurbs, to understand what is actually achievable. So we became very much better understanding drawings and design than if we carried on that traditional route.
Yeah.
Because the traditional route, where you go through and you go from building extensions to kitchens to houses, but you can always there's always a kind of escape route for you if you make it. So then you just concentrate on that, and then you don't necessarily concentrate on the design. So for me, that was the lesson that taught me that you've got to understand drawings, and then from that. And I worked quite closely with there was a company called Pellings, who were the consultant who were taken on by Camden and ran all of their work, and Family Mosaic project. So I knew these guys really well, and they were in the house architects and project managers and cost consultants or whatever. But I worked really well with them and understood what they were trying to achieve, and that kind of led naturally into. For me, it was a good lesson. I think it made me better at what I do.
Yeah.
Because it makes me. So now when I'm working, I understand design, what people are drawing, intent, and I can talk to the architects on a level about what we're trying to do. But
and you also understand the construction side of it.
Right, so I understand the construction side, the reality of what it takes to build that or make that happen, or maybe there's another way that we can do that, which is really interesting.
So you wound up the contractor, or you sold off the construction business, and then did you then reform a new company that was specifically design and build?
No, then I started just doing consultancy work. Mainly was doing what I call project rescue stuff. Because over that time when we were working as contractors, and because I'm not an architect, I'm not a builder either. So I look at it with fresh eyes it's a business to me, and I just look, how can it be better? And we've got a reputation for problem solving, for being able to solve problems, to deliver really difficult projects, and to turn projects around. So there was a project for Sutton before they became Sutton Affinity Own, and they were about to sack they were going to get rid of all of the main contractors. They were on like a kind of 3-month thing to turn this project around. And the main contractor we were working for was a company called Lake House. And they'd asked me to do the job originally, and I'd said no because the works were so bad. So it's not possible to do that. And so I said no. They called me back in 6 months later and said, look, we really need you to come in. I said, okay, if we sort the rates out, fine. And they'd sacked the entire supply chain from even so they even sacked like their QSs and stuff that they had working on something. Everybody was gone, starting again. And they said, look, how can we turn this around? And I said, look, I think, and I read some of the reports, and I said, look, I think the problem isn't anything to do with the work's an issue, but I think the real problem is the guys aren't dealing with the clients properly, as in the tenants. Because there are all these stories about people who, I don't know if you've worked on a job like that, they're just weird, because you're basically in an estate, right? And you start on that corner, you just go round. And you turn up, some people didn't get the message, they've not emptied the kitchen, or they've not emptied their fridge, or whatever they're meant to do. And it just depends how you deal with that. And people are walking in and out of people's houses without introducing themselves, because the plumber goes in. And so we said, okay, what we'll do is, so I spent, I think, a week, and I said, give me the worst complaining jobs. And they were like, why do you want to start there? I said, because if I can fit those, then we're good. And I just went around and met it. I personally went and met every single tenant and said, look, we're really sorry about what's happened. This is what I'm going to do. This is who I am. Here's my card. You can ring me any time you want. And this is what we're going to do. And we made sure that, as we did anyway, that everybody introduced themselves and told people like what they're doing. They come into someone's house, you say, knock on the front, you knock on, because the doors are normally open because of the estate. So people were just walking in, going to the bathroom, doing work. But you walk in and say, no, you've got to walk in, go into the front room, wherever they are, and tell them who you are, tell them what you're going to do, and then leave, and then do the work. And then when you're leaving, tell them. And it was simple. Turned it around to the point where they were getting letters from the tenants for Sutton Housing. They're getting letters from the tenants who were asking us what we were doing, because we were, I think, Lake House were one main contractor, I think Waits were another, and Lake House were the ones getting all these positive things, and the other guys weren't turning around as quickly. And they were saying to us, well, what are they doing? So I went in and explained to some what we were doing, and the others did the same thing. So I had this reputation of being able to solve problems, and I started doing project rescue stuff, which is interesting, but it's, you know.
So I'm interested, at what point did you end up pivoting, or at what point did you get approached to start doing presenting? Or was that something that you went out to
completely by accident. I had done a video, I can't remember, about a project that I was doing, and somebody saw it, and a company called 24, who weirdly I'm now tomorrow working with the the old MD of that who set up her own production company, and I said, oh, you guys are the guys that got me in this, started on this. And so they asked me to do a show. It was going to be called This Old House, about transforming old houses, period properties into more modern properties. And they said, look, we really like you to do it, but you should do some presenter training, because obviously I've not done anything. I said, okay, fine. Went to booked onto this presenter training. And then after I booked on, then they said, oh, actually, no, the Channel 4 said, no, we're not doing this show. I was like, oh, I just booked on the presenter training. But I went to do it anyway. It was fine, it was really good. Really interesting, actually, because it taught me a lot about communication, because TV is about communicating quite complex ideas sometimes very quickly, succinctly, and it was really beneficial. So I went and did the training, and that was it. Fast forward 3 years, the guy who ran the training course is also a TV producer. He's in an office not far from here, working for a company called Spun Gold, and he's sat there at his desk, and the guy that's sat next to him sees his mate walking past and says, hey, what's wrong with you? You seem really upset. What's going on? He said, oh, you know what? I can't find a bloody builder for this new Alan Titchmarsh show. And he was like, oh, I know somebody. He did my course 3 years ago. And that was it.
So you were the builder and the presenter?
So they asked me to come in to do the build, and then they said, well, can you present? I said, yes. And then they asked me to actually deliver the builds as well. And so I said, yeah, I can, foolishly. And it was the 3 hardest projects, hands down, the 3 hardest projects I've ever done.
So was that Love Your Home and Garden?
So it was Love Your Home and Garden with Alan Titchmarsh. I think we did 3 series of that. But it was a great show. It was a great learning curve.
Yeah, do you get editorial control over if you make mistakes? No. So I suppose part of the drama is presumably them slightly trying to exaggerate the level of, because the thing is, if you work on construction for long enough, you know that most projects, there's always tricky bits, there's always challenges. You can imagine that if you're the presenter and also the builder, it's a bit tricky if they're trying to exaggerate the sort of level of stresses or challenge around a particular issue.
Well, yeah, but the good thing is you don't have to exaggerate it. The structure is there. It's like what they call that is the jeopardy in television. What's the jeopardy? It's always there. You don't have to make it up on TV. So that show, if you watch that show, that last day, it is as frantic as that. There are hundreds of people on site, and we start at sort of 6 a.m, and then we're filming at sort of 4 or 5 in the evening, and it's got to be finished. It's incredible. And
so then did that lead into, you've done more shows, you've done shows with Sarah Beanie.
Yeah.
And then most recently with Nick Grimshaw. So you're on the BBC now, is that right?
No, that was a Channel 4 show.
Channel 4,
okay. Channel 4
so you started on ITV and then
started on ITV with Channel 4. I did a show last year called Save Money, My Beautiful Green Home. 3 episodes about normal people with normal budgets, how they can renovate, what they can do in order to make their homes more sustainable, which was brilliant. I filmed last year, I filmed 2 shows. One was the Nick Grimshaw thing that's just been aired now, and that's fantastic for me because that was probably the first time I was there specifically to talk about design, about layouts and stuff, and not so much about the actual construction side of it. And that was really good. It was really, really good fun. And the couple were in complete deadlock. One of them wanted an extension, one of them didn't want an extension, and they were genuinely saying, we're going to leave. I want to leave this house. It's so horrible. And I thought, what's so miserable about it? And it was tiny little kitchen. It's lovely sort of Edwardian semi-detached house in Hythe, in Kent. But the kitchen was tiny, right in the middle of the house, completely dark. And I said, what's the problem with this? I'm cooking and I can't see the kids. And when we have people around for Sunday lunch or something, I'm here all day, I never see them. I said, okay, fine. And we looked at it and I said, and I went for lunch with the producers after we had the chat with them. And I said, what do you think? I said, well, actually, I don't think they need an extension. I think it's something we need to do in the interior. But actually, I think we need to knock down, they had this horrible little bay thing at the back of the house. And I said, I think we need to knock that down. And I said, but it's going to be really tricky because they're not going to get it, because I'm effectively telling them I'm going to make your house smaller to make it bigger, and they won't get it. And they were like, that sounds brilliant, let's do it. And I'm like, okay, but it's going to be a real struggle to get them to buy into it. And actually, the VR stuff really helped. So you look like I watched the advert. So it's not a headset VR, is it? It's like some sort of projector screen that wraps around you. So it's called a virtual background. So they use it in films. It's
yes, we've done one. We do design of film studios. So we've done one for Ari, It's a 360.
Yeah, it's not quite 360, but yeah.
The one we've done is 360, and it projects it on the back using LED basically. So it's no projector. There's no projectors overhead.
It's just LEDs. It's just like LED screen.
Yeah.
And the difference is that when you move around the space, it uses mapping technology to change the camera angle. So it knows where all the cameras are. So it's got a kind of, so every camera has a position, and there's loads of, when you see they do green screen, and there's little balls that people wear. They're on their suits and stuff. Just to map their positions.
Yeah.
But they've got these all over the room, so they know where everything is in the room, and then they're like live mapping it as you move through the space.
Yeah.
So you don't need to wear goggles, and you can see what's happening in front of you. So we could be in this room, and maybe this chair would be real, but then everything else about us would be on a screen. And yeah, it's very difficult. When I watched the show, my wife was saying, which bit's real, which is not, and I think, no, that plant's definitely fake, but those lights, the lights are definitely not there.
So it sounds like quite a lot of investment per sort of. Is it easy to change it and adapt it for? Because it does actually sound like something that would be useful in the industry, but not if there's a huge amount of requirement to make it very bespoke. How easy is it to go from one person's house to say something completely different?
So that's the problem. It's incredibly expensive, which is why they use it for big budget advertising campaigns, like The Mandalorian use it. They used it in that film Gravity, and that's why they use it. I think the technology will change. One of the things, we did some interviews with the Times and the Evening Standard just before the show came out. I think eventually you will go into B&Q and do something like this.
Yeah.
This is what you'll do. But there has to be a drip down, the tech has to change and become cheaper, as it will, as it does with solar panels, VR goggle, everything becomes cheaper eventually. But I don't know how long that's going to take, but I think that's the way it's moving, because it's the only thing, and you'll know this, the biggest challenge you have sometimes is trying to get a client to understand what the space is going to actually feel like. What's it actually going to be like to be there? And
as we've been using the VR headsets for forever, exactly for that, and we found that it's basically a cost saving to us if we can get our clients to sign off the design using the headsets earlier, because it's so much more immersive. And I think what you're doing is better, because people don't really like the headsets, but it does give you a good idea of what the space is going to be like, and allows clients to, particularly where it's like a school, where there's a multi-headed client that isn't used to reading plans, or we've used it with the NHS, you get much more of a buy-in earlier. Because we tend to, architects tend to lose money when you're redesigning things. If you can get people into the space, give them 3 versions, and then they look at each of the versions and then go, actually, that's my favourite, but I want a bit of that, and then get them back into the 3D model in VR, you get buy-in from them, and they feel it's their design, and then it doesn't change as much later. And so that's why we try and get everybody in there as early as possible, because it firms up their decision making, and you don't get them starting to build it and go, do you know what, it's too big or too small, because they've already been there in the final version. So what you're doing sounds amazing, but I think for the moment that the headsets are pretty good.
No, the headsets work. The headsets are fine, and I think you're exactly right. Anything you can do to get people to understand what the space is going to feel like. The average person isn't used to reading drawing. They look at it and they're like, what is that? And you can have renders. They work as well, but to really get a sense of what it's going to feel like is the only way to do it. And for me as well, because I'm not an architect, so, and I said to the guys at the time, I said, actually, what was quite nice for me was to be able to see it as well.
Yeah.
So that as soon as I saw it, I said, yeah, this works.
Yeah.
And you're never quite sure until you see it, until you're in this, right? Yeah. And I was like, I thought it would, but I knew it would, but it was quite interesting for me. It gave me that kind of, and what was really interesting, so one of the Caroline, she wanted this vaulted apex ceiling extension, all glass, right? So she shows me this picture, and I'm like, as people always do, they bring me some picture of Instagram. I said, okay, but look, that isn't what you're not going to see that in your house, because I'm like, first of all, your extension is only going to be a metre deep, and your existing ceiling height is much lower than that. So actually, in order to see that vault, you're going to have to actually you're going to have to go up and do that. It's not going to look like this picture that you showed me, where you can see the vault right from the back of the kitchen. She just didn't understand what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Didn't get what I meant, right? Couldn't make her explain it, understand what I was talking about. And we stood on the stage, and But she went with my scheme anyway. But when we were stood on the stage and they brought her scheme up, and we just stood there, and she looked at it, and she just went, they were all setting up, and she just went, Kunle, no, you mean, you're right, it doesn't work, does it? But ordinarily, you'd find that out
on site.
Or
when they built it.
And so I think it's really interesting. I think goggles are fine. I think this works better for television. And the main reason is because we can see... So if you put them on... You can't really film people with goggles. It's weird. So what you actually have to do is, for some of the other shows that use VR goggles, what they have to do is you film it, they see it in the goggles, then you take the goggles off, and then they pretend they're looking at it, right? And you're meant to film their reaction, but you can't, they're not actors, right? So they can't do that. So in the show that we did, there was this great moment where Nick shows her where the Christmas tree is going to be, and she'd been going on and on about the Christmas tree, and the Christmas tree pops up, and she just goes, oh my God, that's brilliant. And as a kind of clip, screen gap, it's brilliant. Yeah. But there's no way that you could have got her to do it. Not naturally.
In the headset, it would have been, as you say, quite odd. So it's interesting, your route into property. I think the thing that comes across is like your passion for, I suppose, I don't want to say low budget, but like these kind of the small interventions that can make a big difference. And I wonder how, I know I read your articles in the AJ, and you've written about affordable housing. Obviously your experience is, a lot of that is making small interventions in affordable housing schemes that will make a massive impact. Yeah. What's your feeling now about the sort of the state of affordable housing in the UK?
No, it's just in a terrible state. It is. The developers are bearing the brunt of the criticism of it, and I think the point that I was trying to make in the AJ piece was that, look, I've seen it. I've worked on projects, and there is nothing affordable about building homes. So how can you? The government have to make it more affordable.
Yeah, taxing developers to provide affordable housing is one route to do it, but it does seem at the moment with construction values going so high that golden goose might not be able to lay many more eggs. If developers are the ones responsible for providing the new affordable housing, one, it's hard to incentivise them to do that, other than to just force them to do it, and two. I think the state should be funding it instead of taxing developers to provide it.
Exactly, and that's the point I was trying to make. It's that the provision of social housing is a government responsibility. It's not a commercial one. It can't be, because if it is, then it's commercial. So they're going to make commercial decisions. So you can't blame developers for finding ways out or back doors to get out of this, because it's not. And it is not. It is genuinely, the point I was trying to make as well is, it is generally not greedy developers just wanting more money to buy flash cars.
No, at the moment, its schemes won't be sustainable.
It just can't make it work. It just can't do it. You cannot do it. I've seen it. I've seen all the reports you have to write. And when the council, you do a report, and then the council say, okay, great, but we need now to employ someone to read your report to tell if it's right or not. You're like, okay, and then they're like, and you've got to pay for that. You're like, what? And it's just madness. Yeah. And there's just so much stuff going on when you see this.
I think some schemes and some developers, there is the ability to provide it on site in the right way, but it's a very blunt instrument, the planning system. And so then what your article was saying, smaller developers are basically getting caught up in a system that's set up for really large schemes and really large developers, where actually on-site affordable housing is appropriate and viable. But then often the smaller developers are getting hit with the same barrage of, it's quite heavy-duty bureaucracy that they're having to go through, and often then they're providing 3 or 4 units of affordable housing, which actually then nobody really wants in any case. And you wonder in those cases whether on-site affordable housing is the appropriate mechanism, rather than taking money from the developer and using it elsewhere in the borough.
I know developers now who are like, no, we're only going to build under this limit, so that we don't have to. And this is a strategy of theirs now. If you're doing stuff at scale, then all the economics change, and it makes it much easier for you to do that. And working with Argent and Brent Cross now, and that is such a big thing that, to a certain extent, they can make things work.
Yeah, and they absolutely will be providing on-site affordable housing.
Yeah, of course, and they can do that because it's. But you can't do that on a much smaller scheme than that. Yeah. But the rules, as you say, are pretty similar.
Yeah. So the other article that I reread this morning, but I read with interest a while back, was your article. It's called "To Win the War on Diversity, We Must Win the Battle of Socio-Economic Inclusion." And I think it's something that I think as two male white founders, me and John are very aware, and we basically, our sort of top line of our business is that we want to build the cities of the future. And what we feel is that if everybody comes from the same socioeconomic background, home counties, middle class, if all of those people end up in architecture, then it's going to be a quite monolithic version of the cities of the future. So at the moment we've built this AL Academy, which is doing some outreach in Tower Hamlets and Hackney, and we've actually got two students in this week, and we do two students every month.
Yeah.
So 24 students per year.
And what age are they?
They are sixth form. So we're trying to do it. We're working with amazing people, basically at the academy level, who are teeing us up next year so that we get in earlier. The problem that we've got at the moment is that we're actually getting people that have already decided on their course, and some of them aren't doing architecture. So what we want to do is get them. We're going into schools and running these workshops, basically to say, because architecture isn't taught in schools, and so it's not obvious that it's going to be a career choice. If you do geography, then history or English, but nobody's doing architecture, or indeed anything in property. So we're going in and doing co-design schemes, and also just talking about the day in the life of an architect. And it's really interesting because there's just very little awareness. And when we do the kind of co-design schemes, it's amazing. You get a real insight into the experience of somebody living in Tower Hamlets or Hackney and what they think about the impactful things in cities that as architects we take for granted. And it's been fascinating, but I think I totally agree with you that it's about inclusion architecture does a lot without knowing to keep people out. It's a very long, expensive course, is one of the things. It's not really represented in schools, so it's not an apparent route. And then once you go into it, God, why would you rack up 100 grand worth of debt to get into something that doesn't pay very well? Yeah, I was very excited to talk to you about it.
I think what you guys are doing is brilliant. I think that our individual practices have a role to play, and you're playing that role in a really interesting way. I think that's fantastic. I think things need to change further up. I mean, the government needs to look at schools. I was talking to Simon Orphan about it, and we went for breakfast, and I said, I don't remember anybody telling me at school I could be an architect, or about being an architect. Or I didn't even know what it was. Nobody. And I went to a good school, right? Yeah, and it was like, but I didn't know anybody who's an architect. I don't remember. They were all the guys at school were bankers and lawyers, and I knew all those sort of people. I knew all those professions. I don't ever remember anybody telling me there's this thing called architecture, and hey, this is what you could be, and this is how it works. So I think there's a lot the schools have got to do, which you've identified correctly, and then something needs to happen with the courses. But there's some quite interesting schemes at the moment, are there, with doing
there's some noises coming out of Reba. So we've got one guy, Ben, who's doing his part 2 part-time. Yeah. Which, because I think full-time education, some people might choose it, but I don't think for me architecture is quite pragmatic. It's actually a pragmatic, practical thing. And most people who've spoken to them that are in our office would say we learned more in the first 3 months of working here than we did in 3 years at university. And that's because it's very hands-on. The problem is that academics that teach you at university don't tend to have a huge amount of hands-on experience. So what they want to gear it towards is that the education is around the theory and the academics of it, because they don't actually know the detailing and the practicalities, planning law, building regulations. That's the stuff that you actually need. And so I think you need a greater crossover of basically people that know building regs and planning law going into universities, but equally probably those academics need to go and train up, get a bit of hands-on experience on site so that they know what they're talking about. And if full-time education is what you want, great, do it, but there should definitely be routes through universities into qualification where you do not need to spend a minute of time in full-time education. We're paying the salary of the part 2 guy, and we're paying for his course. So he's coming out. I did 2-year part 2 where I was paid nothing, and I had to pay them $7 grand a year, whatever it was. Ben's getting paid to do it, and we're paying for the course, and he's never having to not be in full-time work. For me, makes so much more sense. And I think it should be from part 1. I don't think anybody should, if they don't want to go to university. Some people want to go to university and choose that experience. But I think there should be routes where you're paid for the work you're doing, and you're learning on the job, and also you're being mentored through the university system to make sure that you're hitting key sort of academic learning points as well. And I'm not sure that what Reba and the ARB are talking about is quite as radical as that. I think it's who knows? They've got to have
see. But I mean, look, what you're talking about sounds fantastic, and that is exactly the sort of thing you need, because it's incredibly expensive to study now. Everything's expensive now. And the idea of training, I think 2 years ago I wrote an article about just basically pointing out the fact that architects are trained for longer than solicitors and doctors, unless the doctors want. But you can be a doctor, and you can just go and be a doctor without having to do 7 years.
Yeah.
If you want to specialise, you've got to. But they are paid incredibly poorly when you consider that. So they're up here in terms of the amount of training and the amount of academic years they have to spend to qualify, and they're down here when it comes to payment. And I think I was like just saying, why is that? And what is going on? And how can you possibly expect somebody who is not from a more privileged or wealthier background to sign up to that? It makes no sense. And the trouble is, and I think it was in response to actually the AJ, every year the AJ do that wage thing. It was in response to that a few years ago. And it was saying something, they hadn't listened to this, was probably 4 or 5 years ago, but they were saying the average practice director gets like 60 grand, right? And I'm like, I saw QS the other day wanting 60 grand. Yeah? And how does that work? That makes no sense to me. It's just, there's something wrong in the industry. And
I think that it's another thing that I think comes back to this idea that socio-economic inclusion is the key to diversifying the industry. Mm. And so the industry tends to undervalue itself. Mm. And I think that comes because it's been seen historically as a bit of a hobby. So it's rich people that can afford to do it. So if they don't want to charge fees for stuff, they don't have to charge fees. So what we started realising was that there's a bit of a mentality in architecture of like unpaid overtime. It's a real problem, and I think it's almost, you get used to it at university, but it's in the industry, because we love this thing. Yeah. We should pay to do it, or at least subsidise our clients by getting people working over the weekends and not really charged, because that time's not written down anywhere. It's not getting charged. So you're basically subsidising your client's project with your staff, which is crazy to us. So we have a paid overtime policy. Brilliant. And the reason we did that is because it was in COVID. We couldn't really see where everyone was, so we didn't really know where they were. Like now, I can just tell if people are working late because they're in the office or not. But when they were at home, I sort of was losing track of who was working, and I think everyone was working a lot because there was less to do. So we said we need to deal with this overtime issue. And the first way that you reduce it is to count it. Mm-hmm. And the best way to count it is to say, right guys, you're paid for every hour you work. It doesn't matter what time of day it is, it needs to be logged. And then we realised that it was roughly, at the time it was about probably 3-4 grand's worth of fees were being done outside of, once on charge out rate, were being done outside of the 37.5 hours of our working week. And over the past 2 years, we've reduced that now right down, because you have to track it first, and then we've started going, look, you can see particular people were doing it more than others, and you go, like, you don't need to do this. But if the project's not resourced properly, come back and talk to the directors about how to get more staff on your project. Don't do it yourself, and people can suffer in silence a little bit. So it's been really good, and we've got it down now to a third of what it was before, and it's only done when we really need it. And I think it comes back to this idea that we don't want our staff to be subsidising our clients. Our clients have got, development projects should pay their consultant team a fair wage. The project should. If the project's not viable, then there's a problem there. But nobody should be subsidising anybody else. So we're trying to set our mentality out in our staff. Nothing comes for free, and that goes for every working hour. I think
it's absolutely fantastic. I have a massive issue with this unpaid overtime thing in the industry. And one of the panels that I sit on is the AJ 100, and I do Employer of the Year. And I remember I went to one employer once, and
we're applying for it this year, so slightly conflicted, but we're not actually we're not in the top 100, so actually it might be a different award. It's the AJ award.
Yeah,
we're doing the.
But and what was interesting, and I don't come from the industry, so and actually weirdly I come from the part of the industry where everybody, if your plumber works an extra hour, he wants paying for it, and you pay him, right? And you're like, and then you charge the client. So I come from a part of it where I understand it can be a bit of a problem sometimes. Oh God, I didn't realise it was going to cost us that much, but everybody talks about it. And I was really shocked to understand when I saw how much overtime is done in the industry as architects, and it isn't paid for, and people just do it, and late nights. And so we went to this company who will remain nameless, and I said, well, and so the first question I asked everybody, and I was really straight with everybody. I said, I cannot see how I could sign up to anybody being Employer of the Year if they don't pay overtime.
That means we're going to win it because we're the only one doing it.
Right, if I'm on the panel, you're in. And I went to this company and I said, "So do you pay?" So I asked everybody, "Do you pay overtime?" And so one company said, "No, we don't." I said, "Why not?" And they said, "Because we don't want to encourage overtime." And I said, "But that is the two different things. Not paying for it is not the same as not."
Yeah. We found that paying for it was the way to reduce it because then suddenly you notice it's a bill every month. You've got to get really incentivised as a company to reduce it.
And then you talk to people and you say, "Hey, Sam, what's going on? Why are you working so late?" And just tell me. And it's this. And okay, we'll help you. We'll support you. Not, as you say, don't suffer in silence. But it comes from this kind of, and it came to this wider conversation that I had with architects about culture and what happens when they're studying and how they're treated. And it all comes from that, the way that people are treated. And because a lot of these panels that I do, what's quite nice about it is I get to spend time with loads of architects. And normally we're going up to Scotland or something, so you've got 5 hours and you're chatting with them. And it's fascinating for me to understand a bit more about the industry. And they would say things like, and there would seem to be this element of, that's what we did.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was, then they would say, that's what we did, and that's what made me a good architect. And one person said that to me, who went to the Bartlett, again, I won't say they went to the Bartlett and they're very successful architect's career, towards the end of it now, about to retire. So that made me a great architect. And I said, are you sure about that?
Yeah.
I think you were a great architect in spite of that, not because of it.
Yeah.
I think you suffered that and you become a great architect. But what about the people who couldn't suffer that? They could have also been great architects. But this
people that have got to have jobs at university to pay their way, like they aren't able to put it out.
This idea of like the pressure that people are under, and it broke.
And I think the universities are behind this. I do think that the industry has started to recognise that that lots of overtime is not okay, and try and change that mentality. But because the universities they're disconnected from the industry, and I do think it's those people that went, well, I remember when I was a part 2 doing this.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not,
and inflicting it upon the next generation.
Well, exactly. This is like, it's almost like this rite of passage. But actually, I don't subscribe to that. I think that actually you might have been even better if you weren't treated if you were supported and
exactly, nurtured. Exactly. We've actually been talking for an hour now. So yeah, it's been amazing. And do you have any pearls of wisdom, any things that what are you focusing on next? What's the next project?
So the big thing in terms of the industry is this work with Argent, which is, for me, is fascinating. They're an amazing company to work with. And I am supporting the Nick Searle and Morwenna Hall, who are the two of the partners. And I report to them directly, specifically about Brent Cross and how we can tackle this kind of, they asked me to come in and do some work, and I said, look, this is, I think, what the work is. And the work is, how do we change the narrative of what it means to live in a densely packed urban environment, but be connected to nature? And I kept saying to them, look, there's this kind of the narrative at the moment, to me, feels, I can live in the city and have fun and be close to work and friends and great meals and all that kind of stuff, but I'm going to be unhealthy and disconnected from nature. I'm going to be unhealthy and disconnected from nature. Or I move out into the countryside, have a long commute, but I'm going to be connected to nature and I'm going to be much healthier. And I'm like, there's got to be something in between that.
The last episode of this Urban Forecast podcast was Alice Holden, who's an urban farmer in Barking Dagenham. Yeah. And I'm sure, well, you listen to the episode, but I'd love to link you up with her, because we know a lot of the guys at Brent, like Mo, the leader, and Krupa Chef, who's the cabinet member for sustainability, and I know that they're a very ambitious borough. It would be interesting to see if there's an urban farming angle.
Look, and what's really great about working with these guys is, because it's at scale as well. So they've given me this plot and they've said, you've got this plot, what would you going to do there? And so I kept coming back to them and saying, oh, what do you mean? Can I do this? And they were like, yeah, do you want? Okay. Can I do this? And they're like, yeah, do you want? I'm like, can you do this? Obviously, it's all you've got to make it work commercially and in terms of viability. I was like, and then they said, and I said, okay, I'm going to start asking you now. You're literally telling me that I can do whatever I want if I can make it like all stack up. And they're like, yeah, brilliant. And so we're talking about everything. We're talking about, can we use mini data centers as boilers, electric boilers in each of the blocks? We're talking about, how can we have no peaks in the development? So what does that look like? So can we have like battery substations somewhere or everywhere? urban farming? How do we look at circadian rhythms? So can we do something with the lighting, and how do we deal with that? How do we deal with connection to nature and the fact that we've got all of these different socio-economic groups living within the area? Can we, for example, how do we improve outcomes for everybody who lives there? So for a business that's there, how can I make sure that you can recruit the right talent, retain that talent, have less absenteeism and be more productive? If I can do that to you with this nature, what would I have to do in order to deliver that for you? How can I make a single mother have a more sustainable life, grow her own crops or whatever? How can I help a business who is there and be more sustainable? What does that look like? Does that vertical farms? Is that stuff in basements? Is that on the rooftops? What can we do to bring all of that together? So it's almost like we've got this, and I'm trying to work with the Future Forum and create a model for this, which is all wrapped with nature. So it's all the traditional kind of communication network, the built environment, all the normal kind of pillars, as it were, of what it means to have a big development. But how do they all interact? And if you wrap that with nature, what does that look like? Yeah, and how can you improve these outcomes? And because actually Brent Cross it's in Barnet actually. I live in Brent, but I always thought it was Brent, but it's not.
Is it?
Yeah.
So the Brent Cross shopping centre is in Barnet?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Because they just literally, there's a road going past between the two. And I sort of said to them, I said, so we've got to provide 3 schools there. And we were looking at that, and I said, look, imagine that a school, the outcome of a student in a school was based solely on its location. Nothing to do with the teaching methodology or the selection of the students or anything like that. Literally, because we've created this school in this environment that is better, and so they perform better. Wouldn't that be an amazing thing if we could make that, if we could somehow make that work? So for me, and I was born in Willesden and live there now. So it's really, that area is really important to me. I know Brent Cross, and because it's so big, and so I'm getting involved in the sports side of it as well, which is really important to me. I'm like, look, how can you engage people in...
Do you know the Jason Roberts Foundation?
No, what's that?
It's a youth football organisation in Brent, run by Jason Roberts. It's not actually, it's run by his brother, but Jason Roberts was a football player. I think he played for Crystal Palace, within our lifetime. And now he runs this amazing youth organisation. So we, as part of our AL Academy outreach, we go and we get talk at the Jason Roberts Foundation, and we've organised kind of property football event there, and then also had some of their kids in the office and stuff. They're an amazing organisation.
And where are they based? Where's the actual site? Or is there not a site?
No, there is a site. It's, I can't remember.
It's in Brent.
It's in Brent. Yeah,
Brent.
It's in Brent.
I'd love to talk.
Not too far from Wembley.
Yeah, look, and my view is we get everything in, we link with organisations like that and work out what we need to do on our site in order to engage more people into sport. And then how do we signpost them? Because I'm like, look, it's not about producing world-class, well, it's about world-class facilities, but I'm saying that we don't have to have the best football academy here. We just need to be able to engage with everybody around and then say, right now you go to Jason Roberts or you go to Nightingale, FC Nightingale, which is a women's football club in the area. Same with cricket. Okay, we'll get you into it. Right now you go to Harrow or you go down to the MTC, which is literally just down the road. And if we looked at every sport like that, then actually I'm like, we can be this kind of conduit which just engages and then signposts and brings them in and then signposts. How can we do that? So for me, that's really exciting, because I think the bigger piece is that I think that development is incredibly important, because I think if they crack that development, it will change the way that people think about living in an urban environment. We will stop this kind of rural flight. Because why do people move out? Because they're like, I need to move out because I need more space. Okay. But a lot of the time they say, well, there's no garden, I want to be closer to nature. I want better schooling for my kids, I want to have a different type of lifestyle. Like, if we can provide some of that, some of those people will not feel they have to move out, because actually I believe that as a species we love living together. I do anyway. I love living with other people, because in an evolutionary sense there's a reason for that. It was safer for us to be in groups, and that it's basically an evolution of that primal need to be with other people. And you see what happens to people when they're isolated, it's not a great look for most people. So but if we can crack that, and then obviously then the government may not feel that they have to deregulate and allow cookie-cutter developments to be built on greenbelt land, which is what they're trying to do at the moment.
No, I agree.
If we can crack that, then...
Cities first, cities are the solution. We've got a couple of different epidemics of loneliness. We've got increasing fuel prices. We've got lack of increasing carbon levels. Cities are the answer to all of those, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think so. If they get... And there's loads of other big developments in London and in the world as well that will all be pushing towards this, but if someone needs to figure it out.
I totally agree. That's why that's the company that we've set up, is to try and basically design the cities of the future, building a company to design the cities of the future, because we think, same as you, that the city's the key to solving these problems, all of them at once.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot of research and input, and that's basically what we're here for. So yeah. Thank you very much. I'm going to end on that note. Thank you so much for your time. It was brilliant. And cheers, Kunle.
Thanks, Ollie.
If you enjoyed the show, then please subscribe and give us a review, ideally a 5-star one. And if you want to know more, please go to ackroydlowry.com or follow us on Twitter @ackroydlowry and Instagram with the same. This podcast supports Land Aid, the property industry charity that brings together the sector to deliver life-changing projects for young people who really need it. Visit www.landaid.org to find out how you can help end youth homelessness.